This is Ayaba. He has a normal life with his mother and younger sister Suna. After breakfast, he set out for school, rushing to catch the train on time and luckily making it. He met his close friend after the recent summer break and went to class together. Upon arrival, everyone learned that the seating arrangements had changed and Ayaba would have to sit next to Hina. She seemed shy and avoided looking at Ayaba. According to Ayaba, Hina had returned to Japan a few months ago. The two rarely talked, so he felt she was cold and distant towards him. When she dropped her eraser, Ayaba picked it up for her. Not knowing how to thank him, she became flustered and almost fell while grabbing the eraser. Ayaba caught her, making her even more embarrassed, but the teacher told them both to focus. During the break, Ayaba played basketball with two friends. They wondered why Hina seemed to pay attention to Ayaba, but he was too focused on playing to care about what his friends were saying. Ayaba's big friend approached Hina and asked if she really liked Ayaba because she kept watching him. He was very grateful to and respectful of Ayaba, as they were both in the basketball team before. But he had suffered an injury and had to transfer to this school because it was close to the hospital. Ayaba had also transferred here with him, so he deeply valued Ayaba. Suddenly, Hina noticed some kind of warning out at sea. A mecha appeared, and according to the pilot inside, he had just traveled from the future. Luckily for him, his target, Ayaba, was also in this time period. He quickly rushed towards the land. He soon reached Ayaba's school before Hina had a chance to explain to him. Ayaba was immediately held at gunpoint by the pilot and forced to run. The pilot scanned with infrared and saw that Ayaba was still alive, so he immediately gave chase. Along the way, Ayaba's two friends fell down, but seeing that the mecha wasn't targeting them, Ayaba knew he was the target and ran ahead. The pilot found the mecha's auto-aim mechanism to be useless, so he aimed manually, but his skills were even worse than the machine's. He continued to chase Ayaba, while Hina got on a motorcycle and sped off. Ayaba ran into a crowded residential area, but the pilot calmly pursued and wreaked havoc there. Hina told Ayaba to follow her. She drove into a warehouse and activated her own mecha stored there. She then flew to engage the pilot outside to help Ayaba. As Ayaba was about to run away, Hina called him to climb up with her. The other pilot was shocked when he discovered Hina. He was angry, not understanding why Hina was doing this to him. He then grabbed a weapon, lunged forward, and cut off one of her arms, but she still had the other arm to fire. She aimed at crucial parts and fired, causing the other pilot to fall. She believed she had destroyed his power source. When Ayaba wanted her to explain everything, she confessed that she and the other pilot were from the future. She knew the other pilot was targeting him, so she came back here to monitor and protect him, because Ayaba's future self had instructed her to do so, saying that someone would certainly try to kill his past self. Hina, thinking her job was done, planned to escape and let Ayaba return to his normal life. But suddenly, the other pilot wasn't completely defeated. He desperately lunged to grab Hina's mecha. He activated self-destruct to take her and Ayaba with him. She couldn't open the cockpit because he was blocking it from outside. She then discovered the time portal he used to come here and pulled him into it. He was subsequently crushed by the pressure of the gate. Knowing she couldn't hold on much longer, she told Ayaba that he was about to go to the future and to remember to find Dio. She then disappeared into the portal, and Ayaba soon arrived in the future. He later woke up inside a mecha and heard radio communications, discovering that the person named Dio was nearby. In front of him was an ongoing battle. Everyone there was quite surprised to see Ayaba's robot. They came to ask who he was, and he didn't know exactly where this place was. They also didn't know who Hina was before, but first they had to get out of this situation. The young man named Dio then approached Ayaba to prepare to combine with him. Ayaba didn't understand everything, but at least he could fight alongside others. The captain of the team has allowed Ayaba and Dio to merge because he believes this is the only way to win the battle at this moment, and if anything goes wrong, he will take responsibility. The command team then called Dio and told him to combine with Ayaba. He understood and relayed this to Ayaba, specifically that he only needed Ayaba to follow his instructions. Ayaba complied, and immediately after, his robot showed signs of transformation along with Dio's robot. Dio then flew over and stood with Ayaba. Dio took the initiative to charge forward and fight, surprising everyone with how highly compatible Ayaba was with him. Ayaba gradually began to understand the mechanism and how to control the mecha. This was the information-sharing mechanism when merging together. Ayaba could see the actions he needed to take to control the robot. Dio had started to toy with the enemy in the air, while the mission command was surprised that Ayaba could also fight on his own. However, this synchronization affected both sides, as when Ayaba was knocked back, Dio was suddenly jerked backward as well. Ayaba stood up to fight and could even fly on his own. When the enemy chased him, he saw instructional images and turned back to slice the enemy in half. The robot exploded, and the enemy, now angered by their comrade's death, began to fear the power of the synchronized pair and decided to retreat. The base then ordered Dio's group to return without pursuing. The deputy commander asked the commander what to do with Ayaba, and he said he would deal with it later, as the priority now was to leave this base because it was heavily damaged. Ayaba was very tired at this point, and Dio understood this, so he released the synchronization. Ayaba lost his wings but managed to land safely. The others then came to Ayaba. He didn't know how to open the cockpit, but Dio opened it and pointed a gun at him, asking who he was. The commander reported to his superiors that they were about to leave the base. The superiors wanted him to erase everything about the experiment at this base, including Ayaba. He was being interrogated and learned that it was the year 2088. At this time, Japan was an ally of the Free Federation, and since last year, the Free Federation had declared war on the Federal Republic. He then asked if this was really Dio, but Dio wanted him not to talk as if they knew each other. Moreover, Dio didn't believe that he was a person from 70 years in the past. The commander then had orders to call the first mate and Dio for a meeting. Ayaba took out Hina's hairpin, hoping to remind Dio of something, but it seemed Dio didn't know who Hina was either. After hearing that Ayaba was from 70 years ago, the commander was skeptical, as time travel wasn't unusual in this era. Anyway, since Ayaba had fought to help them, they would temporarily keep him on the ship. They also wouldn't detain him to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. Dio didn't want to fight with Ayaba anymore, even though they had very high compatibility. Ayaba was then given back his belongings, and a girl and her brother guided him on some basics like opening doors on this ship. This place was very large, so he needed to limit his movement if he didn't want to get lost. The ship was about to depart, so the other two left first. Ayaba felt that maybe Hina was wrong to bring him here because Dio didn't seem to welcome him at all. The ship then officially shook and took off. Meanwhile, out at sea, the enemy from the Republic side had sent out the previous units to attack the Federation ship again, and the Federation side was still unaware as they took off from the devastated base. Around the first half of the 21st century, humans discovered a new type of energy. This energy changed the entire world situation. Possessing a new energy source made the Republic grow very quickly and expand across the continent. The opposing countries were forced to form an alliance and establish the Free Federation to confront the Republic. The constant disadvantage against the growing Republic forced the Federation to come up with a new trump card, which was the synchronization system. This could help them fight on par with the Republic. However, this synchronization mechanism repeatedly encountered unexpected failures, causing the entire project to collapse and pause. And 1 year ago, when the battle resumed, this research was continued, but it was concealed in secrecy. The girl Mayu was explaining this to you, but he dozed off, causing her to become very angry and shout. The reason the commander wanted Mayu to explain everything in detail to Ayaba was because he might still need your power, and since this was a national secret, letting Ayaba know also meant they would have to monitor he closely. Ayaba now had to follow to apologize to Mayu because he was really tired and fell asleep. While at school, they were suddenly attacked, then brought here to fight while synchronizing. He also mentioned Hina, but Mayu didn't know which Hina he meant, so she believed he were opening up and imagining a bunch of scenarios from the past. She then took Ayaba to see the mecha he had piloted earlier. He noticed it wasn't like the mecha he came here with Hina. Mayu explained this was a special mecha that couldn't have a second one, specially made for a specific pilot, so if he use it next time, it will synchronize better to suit you. Ayaba didn't know he would still have to use it, while Mayu didn't understand why the commander asked her to modify this robot. Dio then passed by and scolded Mayu for letting Ayaba wander around. He couldn't force Ayaba because he wasn't military personnel and wasn't bound by the rules here. Suddenly, the alarm went off. Mayu told Ayaba to go back to his room while she and Dio ran off, but Ayaba didn't know which way his room was. The main ship needed at least 3 to 5 minutes to charge energy, so the pilots were sent out to fight and buy time for the main ship. As the enemy was predicted to be only 3 people, Dio and 2 others went into battle. The engineer then didn't know what Ayaba was doing there. After a while of dancing around with the enemy, Dio's group's engines were ready, so they were called back. The enemy also actively retreated, making everyone think this trip would be smooth. However, a cannon shot hit and damaged the main ship's rear thruster. The one who did this was a high-ranking commander of the Republic, Alfred. He fired another shot at the ship's wing. The commander couldn't believe their bad luck today. The vice captain told Dio's group to stop Alfred, but the 3 previous enemies hadn't returned and came back to fight. Dio was assigned to handle Alfred, but he noticed Dio hadn't transformed due to synchronization, so he wasn't too scared. The chief engineer asked Ayaba if he could swim because there was sea below them, so in the worst case, they would have to swim to find a way to survive. But the commander called and wanted to ask the chief engineer and Ayaba for help. Meanwhile, Dio noticed Alfred wasn't fighting back, but he wasn't not wanting to fight. He was waiting for someone else to fight instead. That person was none other than Hina. She was a soldier of the Republic and a formidable close combat pilot highly regarded by the Republic. She isolated Dio from the others, and everyone worried that Alfred was trying to arrange to capture Dio for the Republic. At this moment, the chief engineer called to report that Ayaba was ready for battle. The commander apologized for dragging a civilian like him into the battle, but he had no other choice. Ayaba didn't blame him because doing something in battle was better than waiting to die. Hearing that another mecha was coming, Alfred told Hina to try to keep Dio as far away as possible, but she then saw Dio suddenly jerk back. He was trying to get close to Ayaba to synchronize once more. Both of them then synchronized with each other and successfully transformed. Dio then left Hina for Ayaba to handle while he flew off to chase Alfred. He had recharged his cannon and aimed at Dio, but he dodged 2 consecutive shots, forcing Alfred to call for support. Hina wanted to return but was stopped by Ayaba. Dio's synchronization had ruined Alfred's plan. One enemy was about to aim at Dio, but he circled behind and shot him down on the spot. The enemy was forced to support each other in retreating. Hina, still eager for victory, continued to fight with Ayaba only to be slashed once, revealing her pilot cabin. Ayaba recognized it was Hina, so he forcibly stopped synchronizing, affecting Dio. He opened his cockpit to go and take Hina away, but she had regained consciousness and didn't know him. Hina's teammate flew in to attack Ayaba, but Conrad stepped in to block him and told Ayaba to take Hina if he wanted but not to be so reckless. So Ayaba returned to the cockpit despite Hina shooting at him. The enemy then rushed in to take Hina away, and Alfred fired a shot that hit Conrad. They successfully retreated afterwards. Although Conrad wasn't hurt, Ayaba's side was also forced to withdraw. Upon returning, Ayaba was questioned for opening the cockpit to talk to the enemy during battle, nearly costing Conrad his life. Dio didn't care who Hina was because he only cared about 2 things on the battlefield: enemy forces and friendly forces. But the engineer didn't blame Ayaba because it was thanks to him that the entire ship survived to reach the supply station. Ayaba intended to apologize to Conrad, but he didn't blame Ayaba since he had saved them twice, so he shouldn't feel too guilty. Meanwhile, the Republic ordered Hina's arrest on suspicion of being a spy because her name was known by the Federation side. The Federation also had similar suspicions, and some suspected Ayaba was from the Republic. The commander thought it was best to keep Ayaba on probation and under constant surveillance for now. The place they had just landed to refuel was actually where Ayaba used to live, so he asked Mayu to take him on a tour of the area. He went to where his home used to be, but it had been leveled for redevelopment. He thought about looking for his sister, but realized that if she were alive, she'd be 88 years old by now, so he didn't. Mayu also tried to search, but found no information, so they both went to Ayaba's old school, which was completely destroyed by the war. He went to the old basketball court and remembered Hina. Ayaba asked Mayu about the Republic's position because he decided to meet Hina once more to talk. She thought it was too dangerous because he had been seen in the recent battle, but he also thought it was crazy because they were at war now. He then returned to the ship with Mayu, but he considered giving up fighting because he didn't want others to get hurt because of him. However, Mayu, like everyone else, didn't blame him and saw him as a savior. Remembering what everyone had said, he still decided to participate. He went to see the commander and agreed to be a pilot for him because it was the only way he could be useful and he might be able to meet Hina again. The commander wanted him to be sure because she might see him as an enemy who couldn't be spared. Dio was the only one who opposed. The fact that everyone accepted letting him continue to pilot the robot made Dio uncomfortable. He was then promoted to second lieutenant and went to share this with Conrad. The girl here, Vera, told him not to force synchronization next time or both his and Dio's brains would be seriously damaged. That night, the commander also felt lucky that Ayaba decided to return, otherwise he would have had to shoot him to protect national secrets. The next morning, just as they set out, there was suddenly an announcement that a nearby cargo ship was attacked by Republic soldiers. They immediately went to assist, and Mayu informed Ayaba that the synchronization time was only 6 minutes, so they had to be quick. Dio seemed to obey orders, but didn't like having to synchronize with Ayaba. Synchronization couldn't succeed because both sides had to trust each other. Due to the lack of trust, the process failed. They had to fight normally, but Dio recognized the emblem on the attacked ship as his family's, so they had to help Dio save his family as he had rushed in impatiently. Ayaba contacted Dio and shared that he would help Dio protect his family, so they would temporarily trust each other again to synchronize. They quickly cut down all enemies and separated the enemy ship from Dio's family's ship. Taking that opportunity, the command ship immediately shot down the enemy ship. They then escorted Dio's family's ship to the airport, and he immediately ran to meet his family. He was happy to see his sister again, but his father thought staying in this place was a waste of time. The next day, Ayaba still didn't quite understand Dio's situation when suddenly Mayu and another person, Lieutenant Jisaka, came to find him. Both of them informed him that from now on, they would be Ayaba's trainers. At this time, the commander had to deal with a lot of paperwork and procedures, which made him very tired. He asked the vice captain about their 2 trump cards and learned that Dio, after having issues with his family, had gone off to train, while Ayaba, as known, was being sent for training as per the ship's tradition. After hearing Jisaka's briefing, Ayaba felt everything was too rigid now and wanted to leave. But Mayu kept him back because this was partly an excuse to take him on a tour. Ayaba was made to clean around the ship, including the bathrooms, and was also dragged to help in the kitchen and other places. Meanwhile, Hina had been released, and Alfred wanted her to prove her loyalty to the Republic through actions. This guy named Bison seemed to be very interested in Hina, but she only saw him as a teammate, nothing more. Ayaba, tired of cleaning the ship, stopped working. Suddenly, he saw Dio's sister trying to enter, but being held back by soldiers. He went down to ask and learned she was Fiona, Dio's sister. She was afraid to meet Dio, fearing he was still angry due to their father's words yesterday. She also didn't dare to leave early, fearing Dio would feel guilty. It was revealed that Dio had participated in a battle in their hometown before and couldn't save his mother, and Fiona's leg was injured then. Dio blamed himself for not being able to do anything that time, so he didn't dare to face his family. Ayaba decided to help. He pretended to have a stomach ache in front of the soldiers to help Dio's sister and the servants sneak in. They then went to the command room to ask about Dio's location, only to find they were organizing a party to welcome Ayaba. The reason for making him clean was to keep him away while they prepared the party. They then called Dio and asked him to come to the command room to talk with his sister. However, suddenly a battle alert appeared. The Federation forces at sea were being outnumbered by the Republic, so they needed to go provide support. Dio met his sister to finish their conversation, and she forgave him, saying he had no fault and to ignore anyone who blamed him. Dio felt relieved, but just as they were about to depart, enemy forces arrived to block them, led by Alfred. They had to change plans and fight at the base here before going to provide support. Ayaba once again encountered Hina. They had to let Dio synchronize to turn the tide, but their positions were quite far apart, so the command ship had to retreat from the battle zone. However, they were also surrounded by other enemy ships and had no escape route. The captain had to make the decision to abandon the base to escape with the ship. At this point, Hina was overwhelming Ayaba because he wasn't fighting back. Dio had to come to the rescue. Dio wanted Ayaba to stop engaging with Hina because they had orders to retreat from the base, so they should use the synchronized form to accelerate. Both of them rushed straight ahead of the command ship and formed a shield to allow the ship to accelerate. No matter how much the enemy fired, their shots were deflected. They bought enough time for the ship's cannon to charge and fire at the enemy command ship. The Republic commander fired back in vain and almost wet herself as the command ship rushed straight at her. But a collision didn't occur and the Federation temporarily preserved their forces. Back on the ship, everyone could finally breathe easily, and Dio managed to say a word of thanks because Ayaba had helped his sister and him. Not long after, the matter of a part of the Federation secretly researching synchronization technology was exposed, largely due to Dio and Ayaba. Therefore, an inspection team would be coming soon to observe Ayaba and Dio along with their mechas. The commander wanted the vice captain and some others to wear swimsuits for a promotional video to attract more supporters for them. Just then, the passenger ship arrived. Ayaba had heard about the upcoming promotional team and thought it strange to have such things during wartime. But this was to help gain more supporters and trust in the synchronization mechanism. The promotional team then entered and was very surprised to see the two mechas and their pilots. However, they came mainly to film Dio, so Ayaba didn't need to participate. This time, they had invited someone named From to film the commercial with Dio. From had come to greet Ayaba and asked to borrow his mecha during the commercial shoot. The advertising crew then went to the command room, and the deputy captain showed them the top secret areas that were off limits. From tried to demonstrate how smooth talking he was by showering the deputy captain with compliments, which she obviously didn't care about. Meanwhile, Mayu and her friend Rose planned to check out the guys from the advertising crew. As soon as Rose met From, she immediately switched to boy crazy mode and asked to lead the entire advertising crew on a tour of the ship. Dio silently left, so Ayaba had to chase after him to ask if he knew From. He did know him, as they had attended the same training school. From was a sociable person always surrounded by others, completely opposite to someone like Dio, who believed that getting close to others was unnecessary for a soldier. However, Ayaba had to admit that From wasn't bad looking. It was just that Dio didn't like talkative people. During this time, Alfred had reported some things to his superiors, and they wanted him to continue showcasing himself in future missions. Hina, on the other hand, kept thinking about Ayaba. She didn't know what was wrong with Ayaba and why he knew about her. Her teammate later came to take her deer watching to help her relax her mind. Back at the Federation, Rose was allowed to be the mech for the commercial. She went to interview the chief engineer, who found it annoying to be disturbed while working. They later went down to the kitchen to inquire about the meals served to everyone on board. The chef informed them that he had put a lot of effort into his work, so no one had the privilege of eating better than others. Additionally, a swimsuit advertisement segment was inevitable, but the deputy captain had left Vera and Mayu to handle this matter. Meanwhile, the Republic had started researching the Federation's synchronization mechanism to prepare for a counterattack. At the same time, a Republic battleship had begun planning another attack on the Federation. Back on the other side, From and Dio were being tested to see if they could synchronize with each other, but the result was negative. Dio's synchronization waves had started to deviate from what they were before. Previously, Dio and From had compatible results for synchronization, but now they were off for some reason. Therefore, Vera couldn't let them synchronize for the commercial. So Ayaba was called in, and after testing, his waves surprisingly matched From's perfectly. The deviation was almost zero, so they would be responsible for shooting the commercial, and the editing team would insert Dio's image to replace Ayaba's. They then went to the mecha and started to take off. Dio had to enter the auxiliary robot to fly along and film. Dio seemed quite frustrated because Ayaba was stealing all his spotlight. But what annoyed him more was that Ayaba could synchronize with himself and had a perfect synchronization score with From on the first try. From and Ayaba then synchronized and started flying in the sky, while Dio flew along filming, feeling bitter. The commander had to admit that Ayaba was very talented, even though he hadn't gone through any training. Suddenly, at this moment, they were attacked by Republic forces. This was a different squadron from Alfried's, and they planned to take down the synchronized pair to gain higher fame than Alfried's team. According to From, these were also elite soldiers of the Republic and extremely serious about their mission. The remaining pilots had to join the battle to deal with the situation. Since it was their first time synchronizing, Ayaba and From were still not used to fighting together, resulting in them being separated, and the enemy scattered a bunch of floating mines. Ayaba found a way to escape the minefield, but Dio noticed that the direction Ayaba was escaping would lead him further away from his teammates. Knowing the enemy was trying to isolate Ayaba, Dio had to follow to support him. Ayaba now stood before the enemy commander's gun, but Dio rushed in to push away some enemies and caused a distraction, making the commander miss his shot. Ayaba's group had a chance to retreat, and the enemy, having their formation disrupted, also chose to withdraw. The director was delighted because that battle scene was perfect for his commercial. The commander knew that the other group would return, so he warned everyone not to let their guard down. Ayaba later came to thank Dio for his help. The director also rushed over to give Dio and From the script for the final scene and shot it right after. The advertising work was finished, and the enemy was planning to prepare for a second attack to prevent the Federation from having time to rest. The enemy commander now understood why Alfried had struggled so much with this side, but he was confident there wouldn't be a second time. The film crew then left, and Ayaba still regretted that it would have been great if From had stayed longer. Surprisingly, From did stay, as he had been assigned to operate there from now on. Not long after, the Federation discovered that the Republic was also trying to create propaganda advertisements like them. This made it clear that next time they would bring full force to take them down. Hina's team discovered they had just received a new battleship that Alfried had requested from his superiors. The Republic's elite group had begun to detect the Federation's ship. They also received news that Alfried's new battleship was on its way to another battlefield and would pass through this area. However, they were confident they would defeat the Federation ship before Alfried's ship passed by to claim the achievement. The Federation ship had now hidden in an archipelago below to prevent the enemy's detection waves from finding them. But they couldn't hide there forever, and the elite group knew this well. However, there was one problem. They had to be the ones to find the Federation's ship first because a storm was about to hit the area. The Federation ship was capable of passing through this storm, but when the storm arrived, they wouldn't be able to deploy their mechas. Therefore, if they didn't want the Federation ship to escape, they had to find and defeat it as soon as possible. The Federation knew the enemy was starting to search, so they continuously emitted jamming waves to prevent detection. Ayaba wondered why they didn't take the initiative to attack, and was told that the enemy was very numerous, while they only had 4 people who could fight. But it was actually 5 because Conrad had recovered and could continue the battle. He also mentioned that Vera had something to discuss privately with the 3 members of the synchronization group. Meanwhile, the elite group was extremely anxious because they couldn't detect the Federation, so the commander deployed a 360-degree radar, even though using this radar would expose their position first. They weren't afraid because they were stronger. The Federation commander quickly jammed their radar frequencies. Vera now informed Ayaba about how many people had suffered severe brain trauma in the past when experimenting with synchronization. Therefore, she had to design the specialized cockpit to support synchronization that he was using now. She also created a standard brain wave pattern and trained compatible people to synchronize with that standard brain wave, thus achieving their current success. However, Ayaba was a special case. He didn't need to go through training because his brain waves were already compatible with their standard brain waves. Therefore, he could almost synchronize with any pilot they trained. However, problems arose from this. The fact that he could synchronize with other pilots had caused issues for 2 prime examples, From and Dio. It caused their brain waves to deviate far from the original standard brain waves. As a consequence, the more they synchronized, the less Dio and From would be able to synchronize with anyone other than Ayaba. Synchronizing with Ayaba was a double-edged sword. However, if they stopped now, Dio and From could still train to return to the standard brain wave synchronization. Suddenly, at this moment, their ship was detected by the enemy, but not by the elite group's ship. It was Ulfried's new ship. However, he was ordered to leave the prey for the elite group. So Ulfried had to tell Hina to be patient for a while longer to regain their honor. As soon as the elite commander received the Federation's position, he told Ulfried's side to sit back and watch him fight without needing to assist. The Federation commander saw that the enemy had no intention of attacking all at once, so they could still handle it. Vera now wanted all 3 to clearly decide who they would pair with this time. All 3 decided to make their choices simultaneously. And so in the end, Ayaba and Dio pointed at each other while From chose to withdraw. Ayaba asked Dio if he was sure about this decision, to which Dio replied that he would rather throw away all his training efforts than risk leaving Ayaba alone in battle to synchronize with an uncertain From. Besides, they were still not sure if retraining would successfully return them to standard brainwaves, so they just hoped there was still a way to salvage the situation. Both sides then went into battle, and the commander noticed that the enemy had 10 units and had split into 2 flanks. So the synchronized pair would handle one flank, while the other 3 would take care of the remaining flank. However, Ayaba's flank started to feel strange as they couldn't see the enemy commander anywhere. Just as they realized they were being trapped, the commander and a few others revealed themselves to catch both of them off guard. The 2 had no choice but to synchronize with each other, but the enemy commander had scattered mines, causing them to struggle to find an escape route. But the only escape route had been blocked by him. Ayaba and Dio still had one trump card. They both closed in on each other and flew at high speed to turn themselves into an arrow piercing through all enemies. Vera noticed that although synchronizing with Ayaba was a double-edged sword, it allowed Dio to become significantly stronger. The enemy commander was then rushed and struck down by both of them, and the remaining enemies scattered like headless snakes. As soon as they noticed the synchronization had been dissolved, Ulfried allowed his team to enter the battle. The commander knew that continuing to fight would be futile, so he ordered a retreat into the storm. Everyone was called back, and Ulfried also didn't want unnecessary losses by advancing into the storm, so he withdrew as well. But Hina separated from the team to pursue them relentlessly, forcing others to turn back and follow. Ayaba and Dio had returned to the ship by this time, but before Ayaba could enter, he was blocked by Hina. He had to stay and fight and couldn't go inside. Hina's teammates tried to advance, but were pushed back by the Federation's ship, and soon both were blown down by the storm. When Ayaba later regained consciousness, he found himself on an island. The mecha had run out of power, so he couldn't communicate. He got out of the mecha and found Hina trapped in a stream. He ran down to check and saw that she was still unconscious, and the cockpit was flooded with water. Ayaba tried to open the cockpit, but it wouldn't budge. Meanwhile, on Alfried's side, the female supervisor didn't want to send people to search for Hina, but wanted to focus on finding the elite team leader, believing he was still alive. As for Dio, he also wanted to go find Ayaba, but the commander thought that the priority now was the safety of everyone on the ship. When the storm passed, they would be forced to leave immediately. Dio angrily walked away, and the commander knew that even if he forbade it, Dio would set out to find Ayaba. Hina had now regained consciousness and began to control Ayaba. She tied Ayaba up and went to check on the robot, but it wouldn't work. The situation was similar with Ayaba's robot, but she managed to get Ayaba's bag from inside. She then used a gun to control Ayaba, and he still tried to believe this was the Hina he knew. But she spoke directly, saying she didn't know how similar she was to the Hina he knew, but she wasn't her and didn't know him at all. She was a Republican soldier, not his classmate. Dio, seeing that the storm had eased, wanted to go find Ayaba. From also went along and let Dio know that the commander only gave him 3 hours to search. Meanwhile, the Republicans were still trying hard to find the team leader, but there was almost no trace. Ayaba was now sitting and talking about the Hina he knew. He really wanted to meet the previous Hina to ask her about things he was still confused about. Suddenly, Ayaba's robot up there slipped down the slope and fell, pushing a pile of dirt and rocks down and blocking the cave entrance. Both were forced to find a way to dig a path to escape. Hina took a shovel to dig, and Ayaba wanted to help because he didn't want to die there either. He then dug with Hina, but no matter how much they dug, they couldn't make a hole because dirt from above kept falling down, so they both changed direction and climbed up to dig. Meanwhile, Bizon's team had found the wreckage of the team leader's robot, so Alfried decided that from now on, it would be his team's job. He allowed the whole team to go find Hina after the team leader's fate had been determined as killed in action. At this point, Ayaba's side was running out of oxygen. Seeing Hina beginning to struggle for breath, Ayaba exerted all his strength to dig a hole. Suddenly, he managed to break through, causing water to rush in. Both were swept away, but Ayaba managed to swim and pull Hina to the surface. He then dragged her to shore and realized their situation was quite dire as they had lost their supplies back. Suddenly, Ayaba's robot reactivated, and Dio was able to call through. According to Vera, this was a special mechanism of synchronized robots. Synchronization waves would be continuously emitted, and if close enough, they could remotely activate the other robot. Dio asked about the situation there and about Hina, but Ayaba only gave the location before cutting off the communication. He wanted Hina to use this communication device to call her teammates for pickup. He wanted to let her go because he didn't want her to be taken prisoner. She managed to signal Bizon, and shortly after, Dio's side arrived first. Before letting Hina go, Ayaba returned the hairpin that belonged to the previous Hina to her. Although she wasn't the person he knew, he still wanted to give it to her. Dio and from then came to pick up Ayaba and carried the robot back. Hina had changed her view of Ayaba and would remember him. Upon returning, Ayaba had almost no clues left to help him return to the past. The vice commander then called the ship because he heard they had nearly lost a valuable synchronized robot. However, the vice commander still downplayed this, thinking that losing one synchronized robot wouldn't cause much damage. Vera was a bit annoyed because losing Ayaba meant their trump card would be gone. Suddenly, a professor called to report that he was about to visit the Federation ship. He was the head of the Synchronized Robot Research Institute, so hacking into this communication channel was a small matter for him. His aircraft soon arrived and was warmly welcomed by everyone on the ship. He wanted Dio and Ayaba to demonstrate synchronization for him. Ayaba still didn't know who he was, so he and Mayu introduced themselves personally. As mentioned, he was the one who developed synchronization technology and was Vera's teacher. But Vera was the one who created the machine to help complete the synchronization. The experimental synchronization machine was then activated, and Ayaba and Dio synchronized for the maximum 6 minutes. When the synchronization ended, Dio went to meet Ayaba privately. During the process, Dio had realized that Ayaba had lied about meeting Hina on the island. Ayaba admitted it, but said he had no hope left because the Hina he knew truly no longer existed. Dio now understood the reason for his despondency and started to criticize Ayaba for being weak. Ayaba, irritated by Dio's words, brought up the issue with Dio's sister to retaliate. They ended up fighting, forcing their teammates to intervene and separate them. They were then forced to lock both in a detention room to calm down. The professor later came to find them and completely believed that Ayaba came from the past. His hypothesis was similar to the research on the synchronization mechanism. Although people initially said it was absurd, it eventually became feasible. The professor now announced that synchronization technology had not yet been widely disseminated because it still lacked convincing evidence. He also revealed that the Republic currently had the potential to develop this technology because one of his students, who was also Vera's classmate, had defected to the Republic. His name was Han, and he had just reviewed the mission of the female supervisor. Han informed her that she only had one last chance to destroy the Republic's ship, as the superiors could not accept any more failures. Alfred had briefed the team about the upcoming plan, but the female supervisor said she was the leader of this mission. Bizan had asked Hina about how she contacted them, and she lied that she had secretly sent a signal from Ayaba's robot, but she only managed to do so because a few minutes later, the others came to take Ayaba away, and she could only escape. Bizan tentatively believed her and left to carry out the mission. Ayaba and Dio had now heard about the impending attack and were released to join the battle. The commander was unsure about letting them synchronize in this state. But when they went into battle, both temporarily put aside their personal grudges to focus on fighting. The synchronization still went smoothly, and both stood to shoot down missiles while waiting for the ship to recharge energy for the shield. After the first wave of missiles, Bizan, feeling resentful towards Ayaba, targeted him to unleash fire. Dio wanted to go support, but was blocked by the enemy commander and Alfred. The fact that both couldn't reduce enough missiles caused the shield to fail to block everything, and the scientist's plane was hit. Although injured, he concealed it from everyone and claimed he was fine. The enemy continued to fire missiles, and they didn't know how many missiles they had to fire continuously like that. Suddenly, Ayaba's side realized the enemy was stalling until the synchronization ended, and indeed, Scientist Han had predicted the maximum synchronization time was 6 minutes, and now they only had just over 1 minute left. Dio and Ayaba argued again in the middle of the battle, but their argument became motivation for both to try harder so as not to lose to the other. They successfully cleared all the missiles, but only a few seconds remained. Surprisingly, even after the time limit had passed, the synchronization was still active, shocking everyone. The enemy side thought it was just a miscalculation, but when the time exceeded 7 minutes, the female supervisor was so shocked that she didn't notice Dio approaching. Dio destroyed her robot before the synchronization time ended. Luckily, the robot didn't explode, so Alfred managed to rescue her in time. They then retreated. The scientist, seeing the best result of both reaching over 8 minutes, could rest assured and close his eyes. He was then taken for burial. The commander on the Republic side was also replaced, in other words, fired. The Republic then sent more reinforcements, and the person coming to reinforce them this time was none other than Hina's father. The next day, the scientist's funeral was held, and Dio's father also attended. That day, Dio, Ayaba, and Mayu were given a day off to go out. Many people came and asked them to buy things when they went out, the list stretching for miles. As the three set out, the commander had come to meet the general, and he allowed them to proceed with synchronization research, but he wanted to check once to see the results. While Ayaba's group had just finished buying a pile of things, he expressed his intention to help Dio reconcile with his father. But Dio got angry and told Ayaba not to meddle in his personal affairs and left alone. Ayaba didn't know what to do with him, so he just continued on. A while later, he accidentally met Dio's sister, Fiona. Meanwhile, Vera had told the captain about Han. She defined him as a genius, admitting she had to concede to him. But she had gotten ahead of him in creating the synchronization machine, and Han still hadn't created this. However, if this thing fell into his hands, he would certainly improve it to a new level. Han now also wanted to urgently find a way to steal Vera's technology to improve, because he was confident that with the Republic's technology, it would be very simple. Hina's father had now entrusted her to Ulfried for training, but soon they would have a mission to infiltrate the Federation's new base to steal the design of synchronization technology, and if possible, to take both of Ayaba and Dio's synchronized robots. She wasn't confident about participating because she felt a bit guilty towards Ayaba after he had helped her, but Bizon stepped up to request partnering with Hina for this mission, partly to help her and partly to monitor her. Ayaba, hearing from Fiona about how Dio and his father had a fierce confrontation at noon, wanted even more to go talk to the siblings' father. But Fiona thought her father wouldn't listen to a stranger, so she asked him not to make a big deal of it. Dio, that noon, had just met the old butler and then encountered his father. Although the father and son sat eating together, neither was willing to speak first. The father spoke first, thanking him for protecting the family at the old base. He had also heard about Dio and Ayaba's wave misalignment, so he thought his son should quit being a soldier as soon as possible, because Ayaba was just a civilian, and if anything happened to Ayaba, Dio would become useless without his only synchronization partner. But Dio believed that Ayaba was not easy to kill. Although he was a person with many aspects that Dio found irritating, Ayaba had never disappointed them on the battlefield. He understood Dio and let him go. Dio also thanked his father for worrying about him, making his father realize how much Dio had changed after all this time. At the end of that day, Ayaba's group had also taken Dio's sister back to the hotel and accidentally met him there. The two siblings had a pleasant conversation, and Dio revealed that he had also reconciled with their father. Ayaba felt that he didn't need to do anything as everything seemed to resolve itself. Mayu, however, believed that it was because of Ayaba's influence on Dio that he was willing to open up like that. The next day, the two friends were once again brought in for testing for the Commander-in-Chief to observe, and he was completely surprised by the astonishingly low latency in the synchronization process. But the two boys still argued over minor discrepancies in the synchronization. That evening, soldiers from the Republic and Hina sneaked near the base and changed their clothes to infiltrate. That night, some civilian aircraft disguised as cargo planes were set on fire to request permission to land. The soldiers rushing to extinguish the fire provided an opportunity for enemy troops to sneak in. When they successfully infiltrated, Ulfried detonated all the planes, releasing robots to attack. While that group caused chaos outside, Hina's group would go stealing. Hearing the news, the commander summoned Ayaba's entire group and wanted everyone to split up and take action, as having only 8 robots attack was too suspicious. The trio with synchronization abilities would go to retrieve the robots, while the remaining group would go support and eliminate the intruders. Dio had given weapons to Ayaba because he wasn't sure what would happen. After a while, Hina's soldiers successfully reached the location of the 2 robots and began the hacking process to steal them. But while Hina was overwhelmed by guilt, an engineer struggled to shoot her. Her father stepped in to take the bullet and was injured. Soldiers quickly rushed in and blocked the only escape route, forcing Hina's side to retreat deeper to hold out. Her father and Hina were taken to a room for temporary shelter, knowing he didn't have much time left. He revealed a truth to Hina, that she wasn't his biological daughter, but a child he had adopted after finding her on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Ayaba's group had been separated due to a robot falling and blocking their path. Hina's father wanted her to leave and let him have his most glorious moment in his final moments. She painfully left and encountered Ayaba. She now didn't know who she really was. She wasn't the Hina that Ayaba knew, nor was she her father's biological daughter. At this time, Bison heard that Hina had disappeared and frantically went to search. Ayaba explained to Hina that she was herself, so if she wanted, she could return with Ayaba, and he would explain to everyone to help them accept her as part of the Federation. But Bison had found them and suggested that she was about to betray the father who had risked his life to protect her, causing her to waver in her decision. He ran to shoot Ayaba, but Dio and From arrived, pushing Bison back and forcing him to take Hina and run. Outside, there were now countless missiles flying towards them, forcing the command ship to raise shields. Suddenly, Ayaba and Dio's robots were stolen, so the captain ordered them to be shot down. Ayaba disagreed because Hina was on board. He believed Hina was being forced to stay with the Republic, so he decided to save her at all costs. Dio knew that if he stopped Ayaba now, he would no longer fight for them in the future, so he took out 2 old synchronization robots for him and Ayaba to go and reclaim them, as they still had the advantage in synchronization. Vera thought this was too dangerous, but both ignored the warning and synchronized on their own. As soon as they synchronized, both experienced headaches and saw visions of the robots falling, but they ignored it and rushed forward. However, while fighting Bison, the synchronization waves of both exceeded control limits and caused them to see each other's memories. It seemed Bison could also see these images. The synchronization state quickly broke down, so Bison and Hina were called back. Ayaba and Dio tried to chase after them, but to no avail. When brought back for inspection, both of their indicators were still normal, but Dio had deviated further from the base wave. However, his compatibility with Ayaba had improved. Afterwards, they had a proper conversation about everything that had happened. Meanwhile, Hina was questioned by Bison about her protecting Ayaba. She tried to explain about her past as Ayaba had mentioned, but he didn't care and claimed that if last night's events were revealed, only he could save her. She was then called by Dr. Han to test as a synchronization pilot. He gave her time to consider whether she wanted to participate in this experiment, and he deceived her by injecting a drug to stabilize her mind. During this time, Dio informed the command room that everything Ayaba had said about being from the past was true, and he had indeed traveled from the past to the present. The current Hina was the only clue they had to figure out how Ayaba had managed to time travel. That night, Han informed Alfred that Hina had volunteered to be a synchronization pilot to avenge her father. Hearing this, Bison went to question Hina, but by now she was under mind control and only listened to Han's fabrications. He also manipulated Bison into becoming a synchronization pilot with Hina. Despite the brainwave discrepancy, he still volunteered for the experiment, making the synchronization process almost unbearably painful. On Ayaba's side, they were preparing to depart. Earlier, they had discovered a giant cannon built by the Republic. They shouldn't have been worried yet, but suddenly this morning it had started charging energy, causing concern among the superiors who sent them on a mission to destroy the cannon. The new synchronization robot was also completed, so they could go into battle. When it was brought, Dio wanted to let Ayaba know that he also had things to protect, so if he had to choose, he would choose to protect his important people rather than Hina. Therefore, if that choice had to be made, Ayaba could do what he wanted, and Dio wouldn't stop him. The enemy had now detected the Federation's ship approaching. The supervisor, who was somehow still there, had given the commander of this base a strategy to counterattack. Bison and Hina were prepared for synchronized piloting, and she was now no different from a puppet, or more accurately, a pre-programmed robot. The enemy had now loaded the cannon and fired it, shooting straight through the mountain, completely destroying the ships in its path without giving them a chance to evade. The command ship luckily escaped but had to continue the mission. Alfred quickly joined the army to attack the container ship. Dio and Ayaba's robots hadn't arrived yet, so both were anxiously waiting to enter the battle. Hina and Bison had entered the battlefield and rushed to the front to take down the Federation's ship. The enemy was preparing to fire again, so the vice commander had requested the command ship to hurry and destroy the cannon. Dio and Ayaba had temporarily boarded 2 first-generation robots to carry out the mission, and Vera forbade them from using synchronization as it hadn't been fully repaired. Hina experienced a shock on the robot that almost brought her back to consciousness, but the helmet made by hand caused her to lose consciousness again. Bison and Hina then synchronized, but midway through she stopped because she remembered something. However, Dr. Han increased the control, causing her to lose consciousness again. Bison rushed straight to the command ship to attack, but fortunately, the new generation synchronization robots for Ayaba and Dio had arrived. They switched robots and immediately synchronized to fight. Seeing the 2 robots before him, Ayaba realized that Bison was the one who had gone back to the past to kill him initially, and the other must be Hina. The synchronized robots engaged in battle, so the Federation side quickly counterattacked as the enemy's advantage was lost. Vera also called to inform Ayaba and Dio that one of the pilots on the other side was being forced to synchronize, so they could exploit this point to gain an advantage. Ayaba had determined this was a risky move, so he would be the one to go and wake Hina up. Both of them disengaged from synchronization to allow Ayaba to approach and communicate directly with Hina. He called out Hina's name and projected his face for her to see, successfully waking her up. Her synchronization was immediately cut off. Taking advantage of this, Dio and Ayaba quickly moved to deal with the remaining cannon. On the way, Ayaba and Dio were intercepted by Bison. He recaptured Hina to force her into synchronization again, but she tried to resist. Ayaba decided to take a risk and sent a signal to synchronize with Hina. She responded to Ayaba's call, and they quickly succeeded. Their synchronization rate was even higher than with Dio. They used this combined technique to block the enemy's cannon shot. The immense power helped them successfully block that cannon shot. However, the reaction between their technique and the cannon shot once again created a space tunnel. Bison was sucked in, and Hina realized that if she left Bison like that, he would return to the past and kill Ayaba, so she rushed to go through the portal with him. Ayaba tried to stop Hina, but was held back by Dio. She had completely returned to the past, and Ayaba now understood that Hina had been caught in a space loop, and he had never once managed to stop or save her from it. But he made a quick decision, and just as Hina was about to rush in with Bison, he rushed to save her. Dio also decided not to stop Ayaba anymore, but flew with him to hold on to Hina and use full force against Bison. The loop was ended here, and Allied forces quickly shot down the Republic's cannon. The Federation side achieved a great victory. Now, when Hina asked Ayaba why he didn't enter the vortex to return, he believed there would still be opportunities in the future. Moreover, if he left now, there would be people who would miss him terribly. They then returned together in glorious victory, and the film ends here.